Hello, everybody, and welcome to tonight's event in the novel this series, Novel Voices. So my name is Ian Maguire, and I'm a teacher at the University of Manchester's Centre for New Writing. I'm delighted to be introducing tonight's event. And the event is organised by the Centre for New Writing in partnership with Creative Manchester and Blackwell's Bookshop. So we have two guests tonight. We're very delighted to welcome two guests. The first, Nicola Garrard, is a debut novelist. Nicola has taught English in secondary schools for 23 years, 15 of those at inner city comprehensive schools. And Nicola is the author of 29 Locks, her first novel, which we'll be discussing this evening. The novel was shortlisted for the Lucy Cavendish Fiction Prize and Mslexia Children's Novel Competition. And to make the conversation even more interesting, we're lucky to have Joan Deitch, Nicola's editor, with us tonight as well, which will make the conversation really interesting, I think. Yeah, Joan has worked in publishing for many years, and is particularly associated with Hope Road Publishing, which is a wonderful small press which particularly specializes in Black and Asian voices, and has been going, I think, since the 1990s. So I'm sure Joan will be able to say more about that as well. So asking the questions as ever and leading the conversation is the wonderful Ella Wakatama, who, as well as being Senior Research Fellow at the Centre for New Writing, has many other activities to keep her very busy. She is editor-at-large at Canongate and chair of the Caine Prize for African Writing. So Ella has been doing these events throughout this semester. This is a third, and we have one more, which I'll mention at the end. But for now, I'll hand over to Ella. And just to remind you that if you have any questions, just pop them in the Q&A box at the bottom. So I'll hand over to you, Ella.
Thank you so much, Ian, for that introduction. Nicola and Joan, welcome. It's wonderful to have you both here. Ian, you were saying that I have many other, I thought you were going to say hats, at which point I would have corrected you to say head wraps. But anyway, being that as it may, let's start off just to say, first of all, to Nicola and Joan, that I'm a huge fan of your founding publisher, Rosemary Hudson, and the fact that Hope Road is bringing out this incredibly timely book made me very happy. So, Nicola, thank you for agreeing to talk to us today.
Thank you.
And you too, Joan. So, absolutely. I just want to start off. I'm one of those people for whom there's that one English teacher who made life make sense. And I think I can just sort of trace my intellectual development, certainly in a straight line from meeting her to sort of sitting here talking to you now. I wondered if you could talk to us a little bit about your experience of being a teacher, and then we can move on to talk about the book.
Yes, well, I was a rural kid. I went to a large comprehensive myself, and I had lovely teachers and a very, very safe rural upbringing. And then very, very early in my career, I decided to get a job in London. And it took a while, I think, for me to understand quite how different life was for the children that I was teaching there. And that was an absolute shock, because it was completely out of my life experience, was children who are frightened, who are victims of crime, who are underfed, and for whom life is a huge challenge. And I think it took me quite a while. I made a lot of mistakes on the way because I was coming with a different mindset, and I made quite a few mistakes early on in my teaching career in London. And then it dawned on me, and colleagues patiently explained, and students told me their stories, and my eyes were really open to exactly what some kids were going through, and I think that changed, and I've sort of become extremely angry about it since. Angry about the inequality of opportunity in childhood. So I think, yeah, my teaching experience in London really changed me very profoundly.
Your book is dedicated to a former student. Can you tell us about that student?
Yes, when in 2010, I was seconded to one of our feeder primary schools. So I went to a year 6 class. Primary school teachers doing an absolutely amazing job. And so I went to look at how they were teaching, what they were teaching, and how we could help our year 7 settle faster. And I had a year 6 class, so they were all 10 years old when I arrived. And Mahad Ali was one of those little boys, very, very sweet, smiley, funny little boy, absolute darling. I'd already knew his older brother and his mum, but it was quite a very close relationship between a teacher in a primary school and parents and families. You see them twice a day and you spend the whole day with the children. So we were very well bonded, so much that he still called me by my first name when he came to Highbury Grove, to the school in London, because all the kids in that class called their primary school teachers by their first name. It was a family feel, not a sort of distance between them. And then, yeah, he went on, he became a boxer, and in Islington Boxing Club. But he was tragically, when he was just 18, he was murdered on his way home from a party by a gang of 10 men and boys, all of them around between sort of 17 and 20. And the police have never found his killers. And I was devastated by it. This was a boy who's never been in any trouble. He's never been, he wasn't in a gang, he wasn't in any trouble. The only time he ever fought was in the boxing ring. He was a peacemaker and made everybody laugh. And it was devastating. His crowdfunding for his funeral was like my morning register at the primary school. It was 17-year-olds giving £5 here, £10 there. And it absolutely broke my heart. It broke my heart because I knew his mum, and I could not imagine the pain of that, of losing a brother or losing a son. And so it was sort of compounded by the fact that there was no national outcry in the same way as when there are particularly white female victims of crime. And I felt that the media had contributed to the police not being able to find his killers because they were silent on it. It was only the Islington Gazette that dealt with it. I thought I would switch on the news and it would be on the BBC, this lovely boy who everybody loved, who was murdered, but they rejected it as a newsworthy story, and they moved on without ever having dealt with, you know, what a lovely guy he was. And so we were left with this sort of void where the killers went free and are still at large, and people just saw his face, and because he was a young black man, they saw his face and thought it wasn't newsworthy. Perhaps they thought he was already in trouble or something like that, you know. And the lack of compassion or understanding of the enormity of what happened. It should be people should be marching on the streets and demanding the police to find, you know, his killers, but none of that happened. And
so Nicola, there could have been many ways for you to respond to this. I mean, I think that, you know, they could be taking the angle of sort of a public outcry and asking for investigations, or you could have written an adult novel or a newspaper article. Tell us how all of those feelings of loss and frustration and actually quite an anger, because I can hear anger in your voice too.
Yes.
Tell us why that then translated into a YA novel and not anything else. Why this form for the story?
I think it was because for me, I wanted to show people the circumstances that caused the many murders. There's been 28 this year, teenage boys killed in London. And I really wanted to get to that, to underneath the surface of it, and to look at life as a young person in London through the eyes of a young person in London. And I think you have to start with with young people, because adults seem to have already made up their mind, and it's very hard to change their views, and their prejudices are already ingrained. But children are wonderfully open and ready for those transformative experiences of learning empathy. So I think because I've always taught teenagers and children, and I've seen in the classroom the effect of literature on young people and changing their minds about things, I think that it was sort of the natural course. And I felt it was the only thing I could do, really.
Okay. Joan, I wanted to turn to you now, just to ask, when Nicola's manuscript first came into Hope Road, or when you first encountered the work, was it something that Hope Road was already after, or did you feel that this was, I don't know, a book that could find its readership? What attracted you and your colleagues to Nicola's story and wanting to publish it?
Well, first of all, Ella, I think Rosemary Hudson, the MD and founder of Hope Road, would have chosen. She saw immediately, Rosemary's got a wonderful nose for talent. And I read the first paragraph of it, and I was done for. Donnie Leroy Sampson was in my heart, actually. Although he'd wet the bed on page 1, and I asked Nikki to get rid of that because I thought teenage boys would just say, ah. But yeah, that's how it was. You can tell. Rosemary knows these things.
Yeah. Yeah, she's a wonderful publisher. But I think this is a question for both of you. So recently, another English teacher has written about inner city schools. There was an uproar about how the children were written about. Nicola, I read your book as a Black mother of mixed race children. I was being eagle-eyed and thinking, please don't mess up, please don't mess up. And I'll tell you the things I was worried about. The language and the voice is so strong, and it's consistent, and it felt very real to me. But this may be a difficult question. I want to talk a little bit about this conversation that is ongoing around cultural appropriation. What made you feel, as a white woman, and as you say, growing up in the countryside, what made you feel that you could write Donnie's voice? I mean, I guess, yes, so who told you could do it? Because you can, and you did, but you know, how did you know that? What made you feel you could?
Thank you, that's an excellent question. Now, what I would say first is that I wrote it first without any thought to that. It was for me, and it was an exorcism of my personal grief and how much I care as you know, as a mum, and how, you know, it was a really me exercising my trauma and anger, and a sort of channel for my love as well for many children that I've taught, that I've had enormous respect for their resilience and their bravery and their humour. The second thing is that once it was written, I realised, having read Kit Duvall's article in the Irish Times about, it's called "Don't Dip Your Pen in Other People's Blood," and it's about cultural appropriation, and that made me think, well, you know, it is important to ask the question, could somebody else do it better who has lived that life? And one of the problems with the character of Donnie is that a lot of people who have lived that life have limited literacy because of their because they've lost so much school. So boys who have been involved in gangs are often in a position where they are not in a position to tell their story. And then I brought in former students and current teenagers. So I've taught quite a lot of boys who were in gangs, and I ran the manuscript past them. And one of them is a boy who was involved in county lines drug dealing. He was in his uniform going outside of London on the train. He was groomed. He had 3 prison service sentences, and then turned his life around with that characteristic, you know, resilience and utter inner strength, and has become a mentor and is working with boys to stop them going into gangs. And so I sought those people's ideas and thoughts. And one of the things he said to me is, I never thought anyone would write a story about what I've been through. I never thought that I'd see that. And he thanked me for that. So it wasn't done, the first draft was done for me, and then subsequent drafts were done with, as it were, the kind of consent and involvement of boys who have lived on his life and work.
Joan, if I can just pivot to you on the same subject. As an editor, one of the things that would concern me is that reliability and authenticity of the voice, because we have, I didn't know that this is what it was called, but I think in the acknowledgement, there's a line saying that they are speaking multicultural London English, MLE.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yep.
But can you tell me a little bit about how you navigated those issues with Nicola? Like, what kind of things did you feel you had to pay special attention to help her make the book the very best it could be?
Well, I kind of trusted her with the language, and I'm surrounded by it anyway. I'm a good old Londoner. And anyway, Alex Wheatle said to me on the phone when we were having a good old natter and a catch up, and he said, she's got the language properly, you know, it's incredible. And we still use his language from Brixton Rock in my house as a kind of humorous slang. So I think 29 Locks will be, I've just been writing down phrases from it that blow my mind. So I really left it to the author. That's a simple answer.
Okay.
I didn't interfere too much with that. That's okay. I left all the swearing in, by the way, Ella. I left all the swearing in. And then later on, the people who know about these things said, no, don't. It's not good. So I didn't even notice it.
Yes, I think that's the great difficulty though, Nicola, because I was thinking there's a lot of troubling things that happen in this book. There's neglect, there's violence, there's drug use, there's, you know, potential grooming, both of young men to go into gangs, but also, you know, around girls as well, with his friend who thinks she has a modeling contract or could be able to get one. How do you calibrate that for a YA novel? How do you look at something and say, okay, this thing is actually truly awful, but it does happen to children. How do I communicate that in a way that's going to be understanding of their age and so on? What are the things that go through your head?
I think the way that I did that was to put the worst scenes when Donnie was nearly 10 years old. And that way he was looking at it through a lack of understanding. And that way, that device allowed readers who know, who lived that life, and I've been meeting hundreds of children across London the last 3 weeks, and they recognise themselves in it, and worse, things that have happened to them that are absolutely worse than the things in the book. So they, as a 13-year-old reader, will be able to see exactly what's happening because they've been there and they've seen it happen. It's happened to friends. And then other readers who are perhaps, have a more sheltered life will get a sense of it, but perhaps no more than the 9-year-old Donnie has, or the 6-year-old Donnie. And I think that leaves the reader to be able to interpret according to their emotional and their emotional needs, but also according to their life experience.
It's really wonderful to hear the thoughts behind that, because I think, writers like Jacqueline Wilson and her various series does tackle difficult subjects very well. I think it's extraordinary for a debut novel, but obviously with your experience as a teacher, that makes all kinds of sense. Nicola, I'm going to invite you to introduce the audience to Donnie now.
Okay,
Would you like to read for us?
Yes, I will read a little. Yes, so Donnie is very lucky in that he was groomed into gangs. He did potentially have a very, was going to be on a different path, but he was fostered, as some students that I've taught, has been fostered outside of London to sever a connection with the gangs. And he's very lucky to be fostered to a woman in Hertfordshire, and who lives very near the canal. And for part of his year 10 work experience, that's the work experience that a lot of kids do at 15, he gets a job working with the Canal and River Trust, and a lock keeper. And he learns a lot about boats, a lock keeper who was a former merchant seaman. And he becomes extremely inspired by boats. He also learns that that's just 29 locks between him and his mum in Hackney. So all he needs to do is sail down the Hertford Union Canal, and he will find his mum, who he desperately misses and loves very much. So he's somewhere that is safe. And then the whole novel really is narrated by the older Donny, looking back at his time, looking back at how he felt about the earlier stages, but also looking forward to the time when he is able to look after his mum and to become an adult and take charge of the situation and no longer be prevented from being with her. So the opening of the book is when he's very, very young. It's one of his first memories. He's about 5. But he's narrating it from the point of view of somebody who has become very knowledgeable about boats at a later date. Okay. And as you said as well, it's in London, multicultural London English, so which is a dialect that transcends race. It's spoken by any ethnicity and all ethnicities in London, and it's actually an amazing dialect with so many different languages in it. So here we go. I ain't always been a boat boy. First up, I lived with my mum on Mare Street, Hackney, in a room above a chicken shop. All night in my dreams, I heard people cussing and getting their food, and cars pulling away. Now most babies sleep in a cot, but when I woke, Mum was right next to me on our mattress. It was nice like that. And when it was cold, I get up close to her, like we was some knot what nobody can't undo. And the room was nice too. I mean, it got everything you need. Microwave for making stuff hot, mini fridge for making stuff cold, suitcase for moving, telly for watching, toys them key worker ladies brung us, and this snake and ladder set we got from the charity shop in Dalston for 10p. Later, at birthday parties, I've seen how some kids sleep on their ones, and they got carpets and next rooms, or more bedrooms around next corners. I'm talking about kids like Seb from my first primary school, in them big houses with the trees what go snap and dash their branches on cars, alarms going off in the night. I remember thinking, Seb gets scooters and bikes since time, but the pavement outside his yard ain't no good for wheels. Roots vandal up the concrete, sticks trip you up. That ain't looking after kids. Council should do something. Anyways, that room was all ours, but there was plenty others what shared the house. The walls was MDF, like marine plyboard or Dutch barge partitions. Me and Mum could hear everything. Beefs going down, farts in the bathroom. You'll have to cross your legs, Don, Mum goes, this little smile starting up on her, a little twinkle in her eyes. That fella from number 3, he'll be a while, more like a number 2 if you ask me. Them other people's was always changing up. No hello, no goodbye. Sometimes in a little hour, a big family drags suitcases down and one man brings up his rucksack. Mum used to wait a week before checking the food they forget. She chucks milk and meats what's open, but pasta and tins was ours, and potatoes if there wasn't manky. Finders keepers, innit, Don? One time, next door was left open. The mattress got yellow circles like someone pissed theirself every night. A window blind hangs sideways, shanking up the shadows in slices. This weird silver bug swims like a fish on the floor. It turns to dust under my finger, just like that, like it never was a thing. A landlord man comes up wearing rubber gloves, goes down a little time later with 2 bin bags. Now that room was some lady's life, all her stuff there, like she run down the corner shop and she gonna come back in a little minute. I get on the bed, of course, and jump like a donkey till Mum whispers, not vex, but like she means it, "Don, leave it out. You'll get us terminated, babes." I'll tell you something you won't believe, but deep under Hackney, under the ground, when it's late and them tube trains and pipes and street noises calm down, you can hear water, real water. It goes under the building, maybe even through the building. One time I heard, maybe I dream it, it ain't easy to say in London, this split sound, this crack, like the whole building's broke free, like it's floating away. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Your lucky children, those voices were brilliant. I'm just thinking of bedtime stories.
Yeah. I was just going to say that's one of the things, you know, when I'm reading in the classroom to kids over the years, many novels, I sort of, they love the accents and the voices, and it's funny when I go to London and I read from it, it's interesting that there's no, they just sit back and enjoy it, and I was quite amazed by that, because I thought, oh gosh, you know, I thought I might get crucified for my accent, but no, they're really there with me, and
I think
in the character.
What that opening reading gives us is this wonderful introduction to a child who is in some ways wise beyond his years, and in many ways just so naive and inexperienced, and that balance I felt was quite a delicate one to get, because there are things that he knows that you wish he didn't know, and things that you think, why has no one ever told him that? But Joan, I have another question for you. Is I just wondered about in the I am, you know, obviously really interested in this bit about how an editor helps a writer bring a book to the world. What were some of the things that you and Nicola had to work hard at getting right? You know, in terms of that balance between what Donnie can know and what he can't know, and how do you communicate that? Were there any particular things that you felt were particularly difficult that took some time to work through? I mean, maybe you could prompt Joan, Nicola, maybe she's forgotten.
Well, I think it was the structure. I was trying to be clever.
Can you tell us about that, Joan?
Don't try to be clever. There's the answer.
Yes, I think Rosemary very nicely allowed us to talk to each other and email each other, which a big publisher would never do. They're very protective of their authors. They would never, ever allow a self-employed desk editor to have anything to do with an author. So once Nicola and I had got the all-important rapport and trust between us, we could discuss anything. I've just been going over all our emails, and it was structure. Nikki had swapped between past, present and future, and I found it confusing. So I just said, can we shovel the future things at the end in one big dramatic episode? And she very nicely said yes. So that was very good. And sorry, carry on.
I was going to say, I approached our relationship with incredible gratitude that I'd got this novel this far. And I've always felt this as an extreme, you know, that or almost a sort of crusading thing. And once I started to work with Rosemary and people like you and the designers, I said, I'm going to be saying yes, because it felt that this is worth much more than just a novel, that it was a novel that I wanted to change people's hearts and minds. And if that meant changing the language, taking out the F words, changing the structure to make it work for readers so that young people would read about this story, that was the most important thing. So I went into it thinking, you've got the experience and I'm going to say yes. And so that was my, I went into our relationship with that word on my lips.
Because you really are dealing with an exacting audience. I think that there's very little that you can get away with when you're writing for young people, as they will put the book down or they won't engage at all.
Yes.
I want us to talk a little bit more about Donnie and the characters in the book. One of the things that I found very interesting was this combination of sweetness and care and respect in the boys, and then the potential for violence and behavior, as it were. A lot of that has to do with the society they're growing up in. But I thought that you did a very good job of reminding us constantly that these are children and these are the causes of their behavior. I'm thinking of Olu, Donnie's foster brother, who is basically grooming his own younger siblings to become runners or whatever it's called. And at the same time, he really cares about their table manners, how they speak to their mum. He makes sure that Donnie has a really nice present for his birthday. All of those things were incredibly touching. And yet, because of his actions and because of where he's led his brothers, something really tragic happens. Can you talk to us, Nicola, a little bit about what you had to think of when you were allowing for those complexities in the characters, not just Donnie, but even in the minor characters too?
I thought, really, I sometimes have said to people that it feels like a giant work of plagiarism, because everything that happens has been something, that has happened. Very little of it. Well, the second section, the last section, is fiction. The canal journey, but everything that happens in London are stories that are real and that have happened. And I've quite often in London been really surprised when I've heard that a boy has gone on to do something for a gang that has got him, into a lot of trouble. And I just see the child. I just see the boy who is really has a lot of challenges, but is a lovely older brother and is a lovely friend and is a good student at school as well. I mean, quite often there's been baffling cases of boys that I've taught who've gone on to become, to join a gang and to do things that are terrible. And they're often doing them because of the challenges. They're doing them in a way that is going to try to help their families and help. And in certain circumstances, in certain environments, there is nothing else they can choose to do. That the gangs actually put boys into a state of debt and into a state of fear for their family's safety, and so they have to toughen up, and they're actually brutalized by it. It's child abuse and brainwashing, and through so I sort of thought about those boys who have been in trouble but are at core really lovely, and in any other environment they would be turning out to be very fine young men. And
I think yes.
I don't know if that answers it creatively.
It absolutely does. It absolutely does. Joan, I wondered if you wanted to add anything to that.
Oh, I was just reading a sentence in the book, just a few words, and it said, "The noble hero, Donnie." That's who he is to me. I loved Olufemi. I thought he was wonderful also. You described it so well, Nikki, the dichotomy, or whatever you want to call it, between the good behaviour and the way people are dragged into wrong things. They're all heroes, actually.
Yes.
Yes, Nicola, just there's a point in the book where Donnie's talking to his mother and he says, you only can't see the eggs because you're living in it. So forgive me.
Oh yes, I remember.
You only can't see the eggs because you're living in it.
Yes.
You got to look at the big picture. It ain't all here. This ain't all it is. There's more. And one of the things I really loved is that you take Donnie out of his environment to put him in the countryside. And he discovers so much about himself, but also about his potential.
Yes. I think that, that came directly from my experience of doing trips with young people into the mountains. In fact, the story started as a long poem about a group of Islington boys on a PGL holiday who dropped the map and had to get back on their own, and how they used all their resources, all their strength, and their bravery in the city to find their way back without their map. And so I've seen kids on trips go from being very, from having one mindset of the city and then finding themselves breathing where there isn't a fear of knives. It's a terrible thing to spend your childhood frightened of violence, and it's not an irrational fear. It's people who have been stabbed. There's been, in the last 4 years since I started writing the novel, there's been 68,500 stabbings in London alone, and nearly 100 murders of teenagers, mostly boys, mostly Black. And so this is a rational fear, which is corrosive and is an abuse that is inflicted by society on boys, mainly living in poverty, and poverty is a violence inflicted upon them. And
sorry, I'm really struck, Nicola, by the words that you're using, that this is a violence on the boys, and these are things that are kind of inflicted on them. One of the words that has been troubling me as I've been reading this book is the word resilience. Because Donnie is resilient. And then I think that, the more involved you get in the back and forth with foster carers, his mother being in and out of jail and so on, I kept thinking about what we ask of Donnie, because we're asking him to be resilient. Things are taken away from him. He's moved. Things aren't explained to him.
I was going to say, I based part of that on a boy that I'd known who came late every week to my tutor group. And he was late every week because his mum was a victim of domestic violence. And so they were in hostels and bed and breakfast. They were homeless, and various cousins' couches, sofa surfing. And generally, his life was very, very difficult. So he did come in late, and a school that was less understanding would have sanctioned him for lateness when it was something he couldn't avoid. But he was relentlessly positive about his life in strange ways. So I would say to him, was your mum with you last night? And he'd say, no, I was with a cousin, and she, we were going to see each other tomorrow. And I said, was that okay? Coming all the way from Tottenham. And he said, yes, I love being at my cousin's because they've got a cat. And he'd say, if I ever get a garden when I'm older, I'm going to get a rabbit. And he was already 14, and he just was put through what we would, what I consider to be hell for a child, to be homeless. And he could just looked for the positive and the hope. And so I don't think Donnie's character is unreal in its resilience. I think it's actually something that, that I wanted to celebrate, that spirit.
Yes, absolutely. Nicola, tell me how the schools are responding when you're giving readings.
Oh, it's wonderful. It's really wonderful. Now, I thought a lot about what the Professor Bishop in America, Rudine Bishop Sims, she said that children's fiction is a combination of revolving of sliding doors and windows and mirrors. And so I've got the book to hold up as a mirror for children to recognize their own struggles and to celebrate their skills that they've developed, whether it's of survival or friendship, in difficult circumstances. And I've also sort of shown it as a sort of as a sliding door for children who are living very safe lives, where they don't lock their bikes and they can walk around with their phones, and they don't need to worry about crime at all, whereas they can have a window in and develop that empathy, for people they will meet later in life. They will meet people later in life that have had those experiences of childhood, and so that they can learn that empathy. And so I'm going into schools that are the same, that have children who have got absolutely no idea, beyond perhaps some grime music, about this life, the conditions of some kids. And then I go into schools in Norwood and in Catford and and Islington, and meeting kids for whom life is so much worse than in the book.
Okay.
And that is, they tell me after, I do the reading and Q&A, and then we have a chance to do some creative writing often, that their experiences come out as a result of it. And I have been quite shocked actually by how much they want to tell me what they have experienced that's similar in the novel. And that actually brought it very much home to me that this is a book that is very triggering, but also cathartic for a lot of children. It's real. It's very, very real for them, and I think that that's an enormous responsibility that I've got, and I hope that I can, sometimes I have to make a safeguarding referral because something I've been told is a very serious, child. So it touches a nerve.
So, Nicola, I guess this is a question I have as well about sort of there's a lot in the book that seemed to me to be very campaigning, as in when Johnny talks about things that are unjust. And I love the way he can go off on these gorgeous rants where, being the middle-aged person I am, I'm kind of thinking, what does that mean? And I'm having to look it through. But one gets a sense of his own outrage, and you contain it in that he articulates it very much in the way of a young man, a child, a teenager would do. For you, and I guess for you too, Joan, as the editor, how did you stop it from becoming, I guess, polemic, as opposed to a novel for young people? Because things like police violence, the way the care system works, the way the incarceration system works, all of these things, and also even touches on wider society in terms of who has power and who does not. How did you balance those things together with story versus all of these issues that you wanted to tackle?
I just felt it was really Donny and his mind. I loved it when he had a rant, and Laura has a rant as well. She gives it
his foster mother, yes.
His foster mother in Hertfordshire. She really spells it out to him and fills his brain with new thoughts. And but I love the things like when Donny is in a police cell. Shouldn't tell too much of the plot, and he's got the most wonderful thoughts about the other prisoners and things. I mean, he's got a unique take on life, and I just loved it. So I heard the rant, and it's stung actually. It has an effect on you.
It's character driven.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Were there things for you, Nicola, about that were particularly challenging?
Yeah, well, I think it is for me. It is. I'm not sure whether polemic, but I suppose the didactic novel. It is in the sense that Steinbeck is, and it has a point to it. So I mean, going back to Alex Wheatle, his recent novel Corn Warriors is very explicitly about taking the scales off people's eyes about reparations and how important they actually are, and how for teenagers to see what was happening in 1765, and so in Jamaica. And I think that you can, as long as you write beautifully and you have a good plot and your characters are people that the reader will want to be engaged with, you can say your thing, you can be political, and they will not accept it if your story, if your plot or your characters or your language is less than good. So I did smuggle in a lot of anger into the book, but I hope that it is done in a way that is the anger that I have heard from boys. I've as I said, it's the kind of emotional plagiarism, because I've sat in a tutor group with a boy who I've just told, if you are stopped and searched, ask for the collar number. Your parents pay taxes that pay the police officers' wages. You must ask for their collar, and they must tell you because they are public servants. And then when it was done, when a few weeks later, when he was stopped and searched, and he said, "Can I have your collar number?" the policeman said to him, "Don't be effing cheeky." And so that I have a sort of sense, I have a fury about that, because I was the form tutor who said you have these rights, and then it made things worse because of the police's attitudes to young boys. And you know, there's a whole raft of things that I realized I've been bubbling about in anger for a long time. And you know, my own children are mixed race, and I cannot stand the idea that their surname will be rejected in a list because they have an Indian surname, and they will, and you know, the other side of the family is from Trinidad, and they will potentially be, as a survey has recently shown, they'll be rejected because of on the strength of a surname in a application process. So this sort of anger here is in the book, but it is, I suppose, it's things that I've been told. I remember a boy telling me that I'd been his tutor since he was in year 7, when he was a very sweet little boy, and then around year 9 he said, "Miss, today on the bus a woman moved away from me and held her handbag." And you know, what has happened? What have I changed, or has she changed? But she's always been there on that bus. And now he's suddenly gone from cute little boy to threat. And what has happened? So that, yeah, all of that sense of how actually teenage boys are lovely, and they say the sweetest things, and they adore their mothers. They absolutely adore their mothers.
I think that's one thing that's really clear, because Donnie's mother she's failed, and perhaps she has been failed herself, but she can't look after him. And yet you write their affection and their dependence on each other really brilliantly, and the very real loss that Donnie feels when he's away from his mother, even though, this is what I particularly love, Nicola, even though Donnie himself kind of wants to stay where he is in the countryside, and he doesn't say as much, but there's that very real conflict about being loyal to his mother, but also realizing that this life is safer.
Yes, absolutely. And
that must have been difficult.
Yeah, there was a very traumatic case a number of years ago where a boy had poor control of eczema, and his mother was unable to look after him, but he looked after her. He was a young carer, so when he was put into the foster system, he went kicking and screaming because he knew that she needed him as her carer, and that you know, that's incredibly traumatic. And I just think, you know, that there's been so much underfunding in this area, in child mental health services and social care, but work, you know, youth clubs and schools, that we are letting down enormously young people. And so yeah, but despite all of that, there is such enormous amounts of love. Where things are dysfunctional, there is still love. And there is such a thing as the good enough parent who meets the child's emotional needs, but not their physical needs.
I want to move to one question from the audience, from Deepika, who says, how and when did you know that your manuscript was ready to be sent out into the world after completing the initial draft? That's a nice, easy question.
Well, that's a lovely question. Yeah, no, well, that's the thing. I did the typical thing where I wrote it and I was in such a hurry to get it off that I sent it off to some agents straight away, and I picked agents that I read the books that their authors had read and written, and I just was so desperate to get it. I was desperate to get it out there, so I sent it out too early. But of the first 10 agents, I got a reply from one of them on the same morning that I sent it, saying, "You're onto something. This is great. Let's talk." And that was amazing. I was like, "Oh, is this how it goes?" This is, but it's not ready. And I had 3 or 4 agents say to me, "This is nowhere near ready, but you must continue it. This is something that is special, and that you must continue. But go away and come back when you've done a bit of work."
Did anyone warn you not to do this? Because I have to say, it is brave. It is, even as you're saying, the mother of mixed children, there is something about being confident enough, not just with your own experience, but also the people you call upon, to write a story in which the protagonist is a Black teenage boy.
Yes.
So did anybody say, don't do it?
No, nobody said that to me, but I think I did have an experience that when it went out on submission, a very large publisher, commissioning agent and publisher wanted it, and they had a wrangle in the commissioning, the acquisitions meeting. They had a wrangle with the PR, and they actually had a sensitivity reader, a Nigerian sensitivity reader, read it, and she was one of their editors in a different department, and she said, "This is lovely, this is fine, I don't see any problem with its representations at all, go ahead." But the PR person said, we just can't risk this, because it's not the people who read it that are going to be angry, it's going to be the people who don't. And so it went through 2 acquisitions, 3 meetings with them, and then it fell down. And I think that was the PR person was very sensibly cautious about it, because I don't think it's automatic at all. And they're not saying don't write it. They were just saying we're going to have difficulty, I think, because with a large publisher. What if this is not taking up space from a writer of colour? And I think the wonderful thing about Rosemary Hudson and Hope Road is that I'm the exception to the rule with their list. I'm one of the only white faces on their list, that their remit is to publish Black, Caribbean, African diaspora stories, and that I've been given, I'm incredibly grateful that Rosemary's taken this story and said, no, this is actually important, and I don't care what colour the writer's skin is. So I think that without Rosemary it would be nowhere. I think that it's a wonderful thing having her confidence and support, which
shows the importance of independent publishers. I think that there's a way that they can make decisions. Joan, I don't know if you wanted to add to that answer at all.
No, I don't. This is completely irrelevant in a way, but there's a song that I absolutely love, and it's about all of us, and it's by India R.E., and it's called I Am Light. And it's about underneath all our colour, our past, our this, our that, we're all beings of light, which is rather philosophical for this discussion, but it's fundamental as well.
I think maybe that's the thing, that whoever reads it, it's got those universal themes of love and family and of friendship and loyalty to our friends. And I think that's a very powerful message for teenagers to see that life can change for the better, and you will get agency and you'll be able to use it. And I think a lot of young people feel very frustrated that the system is there and is abusing them, but that they will be one day the people in charge.
I think one of the things to mention to audience members who haven't read the book, that there are moments of levity. There are things that I was laughing out loud sometimes at the way Donnie explained things to himself, but also sometimes just outward. So while it is a very serious book about issues that I think are quite urgent, there was that lightness that seemed entirely appropriate for the demographic, but also the thing. I just wonder, Nicola, so I was talking about reading this as a book that was very campaigning, even as it is engaging and memorable. But do you feel that this is now the way that you want to go, or do you feel that this is the book and you've written it now and that's the end of it? Are you now a novelist?
I hope so. I really hope so. I've been writing away since, and I've just recently finished a first draft, an early draft of a novel. Again, teenagers. Again, I'm hoping that it's like 29 Locks. It's lyrical and touches upon the issues that matter to teenagers. So I think being around teenagers for so long and having one myself now, I love that sense of, William Blake wrote Citizen of London, lift up thy countenance. And I think that's one of the things that I love doing in the classroom and in my writing, is to say there's more, there's look at the big picture, don't believe everything you're told, and to look at difficult issues with teenagers, but in the context of love and friendship and heroism in young people as well.
Yes, and I think maybe that sort of, as we draw to a close, one of the last things I wanted to say to you was that as a Londoner myself, I loved that this was in part a love letter to London. You know, he lists sort of the places he's lived, that all of that business with the canals and how, you know, they connect, and the rivers underneath the city. I think for me, that felt really important. And you also allowed him to connect with nature in a way that one doesn't often see. It's a great achievement. And I'm just really grateful to you, Nicola, for talking us through some quite difficult questions with such grace and generosity, and to Joan for contributing. I think it's always really interesting to meet the person in the back room. And I say this because I'm usually the person in the back room.
Yes.
Thank you both very much, and congratulations to Hope Road, because this feels like an important bit of publishing. I'm really grateful to you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, am I on? Yep.
Yes.
Hi. Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much, Nicola, Joan, and Ella, for that really fascinating and illuminating conversation. It was great. I really enjoyed it. And I'm sure many of the people who haven't read 29 Locks will be eager to read it, so you can get your copy from Blackwell's and other good bookshops. So thank you very much for that, all three of you. Just to remind you that we have one more Novel Voices. The last of this year will happen on the 6th of December. Ella will be in conversation with Femi Coyote. So please book for that, and we'll see you again there. So thank you very much. Thanks for coming, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye.